this particular political climate that we're in,
Yeah.
and this cultural shift that we're witnessing, you kind of have to be in your face, unabashedly, whoever you identify as being.
Yeah.
And this is the perfect representation of that. And I love that in big letters is the word sissy,
Mm-hmm.
which if you yourself, if you're a member of the LGBTQ community or somebody who doesn't necessarily follow societal norms as to how genders are supposed to behave, that word sissy has followed you quite a bit, and it's followed me for quite a bit. And so I love that that is the title and that is the word you've chosen for this memoir. Talk about the evolution of your feelings of that word.
Yeah. Well, when I sat down to think about what is, I love one-word titles first off.
Yes.
I love a one-word title. She loves a one-word title. And I was like, if I had to pick, it was a real journey for a long time to figure out, like, what is, if I had to use one word that I really want to sort of like to proclaim to the world, what would it be that I wanted to proclaim? And for me, the reason why the word sissy is perfect is because it represents so many things, right? On one level, it is a unifying word for a huge portion of the LGBTQ community. Because basically, if you're in the LGBTQ community and you were assigned male at birth, odds are you were called a sissy as a child.
Yeah.
Whether you identify today as a trans woman, as a gender non-conforming or non-binary person, as a gay dude, as a bi dude, whatever, like, we all kind of have this origin word and this same kind of origin shame that's based around being gender nonconforming or perceived to be gender nonconforming, as children. And so it felt really beautiful because me myself, I don't necessarily exist comfortably within any one group in the LGBTQ community. I feel just at home in the trans community on one level as I do in the gay community on another level, right? And so it's really beautiful to have a word that I think that strings us all together and claims that there is a common experience or some level of common experience among us, that gender policing and, the idea that there's one way to inhabit, your gender as a person, and that there's a correct way to do that, I think has followed most of us for all of our lives. And that applies even beyond the LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
So I love the word sissy because it kind of, it's this origin story for all of us in a way. And I also love it because there's just something so fun about just like laughing at your haters,
Yeah.
Like I love, like my favorite thing is when people, like, sometimes people on Twitter, like when conservatives find me, they'll just leave, like, because, they never leave nuanced comments. So they'll just see a picture of me and then they'll just be like, fag. And then I'll just be like, correct. Next question. Any other questions?
Appreciate
right.
it.
Like, sissy. I'll be like, yep. It's just like, there's something about saying like, oh, totally, girl. Of course. Like 100%. Yeah. I'm the cutest fag in town. That just like, and then all of a sudden they're like, huh? Like, wait, you're not like crying right now? I'm like, no, girl, that's a compliment. And then all of a sudden, like, who has the power in that situation?
Yeah.
So there's something about being like, hi, everybody, sissy, no longer a term of shame, only a term of pride.
Hurts.
Get used to it, world. Like, you don't have that power over me anymore.
I think there's been a conversation as of late about this idea of reclaiming words like sissy, like fag, that have been historically used against us in negative ways, such as the way you were describing. And a lot of that comes from when we were younger and hearing these words used against us in such a way, because I think there's, we talked about this later in an earlier time during the show, but this idea of the intentionality of slurs, and maybe not even slurs, but words that you are using this for a specific purpose, and that purpose is to make somebody feel badly about themselves. And so I remember growing up and hearing sissy, and since I grew up in a Mexican-American community, I heard maricón, which is the Spanish equivalent of faggot. But now I feel like those words are what they were then, now not so much now. But I'm curious if you remember the first time somebody used a word that made you question who you really were.
Well, I don't have a memory of the exact moment that I first heard it, because memory, in your early days is, I write in the book, is like, it's like a dandelion, it just kind of is this thing that sort of blows and it's wispy. It's like a tuft from a dandelion. Yeah. And if you try and catch it, like even just the movement of trying to catch it, sometimes it just
makes it disperse even more.
Yeah. And so, but the thing that to me is so important about that is that gender policing and gender shame, it starts for most of us, even before we have the ability to form coherent memories. You know what I mean? Like, that's how early this shit starts. It literally starts from the womb for most children, because the moment you know the sex of the baby, like people say, I can't wait to, find out who my kid is as if knowing the sex of the child tells you anything about who your kid's going to be. You know, as if you actually know what gender they're going to end up. And I just, you know, I hate to break it to like, you know, cis hetero folks in the world who are about to be parents, but I'm like, you know, you're playing Russian roulette, right? Like you don't actually know, you know, and I mean, maybe that's not the best metaphor in terms of like, you know, representing the movement, but it's funny. And I think it's true.
It is.
So, you know, if you proclaim loudly to the world, it's a boy, like you know, you're playing Russian roulette to a certain degree because that may come back to bite you in the ass. But anyway, so I don't have a conscious memory of exactly when I was first called slurs or anything, but I know that sissy was the first word that people learned to talk about gender-based difference in my life, and it even predated the word gay for me, right? Like gay came in like late elementary school, but sissy was from childhood. The idea of don't be a sissy, like sissy and tomboy were sort of the early things I knew. And that's why it felt so important to come back to this word for the title. And also because I wanted to pick something, I didn't want to call it a term that was used as an identity term by the community because I wanted it to be more open-ended than that. But the thing I love about the word sissy too, the thing that's so powerful about it to me is that it also stands for sister.
Oh, I like that.
You know what I mean? Like lots of people grow up being like, oh, hey, sissy. You know, like, and it's like a cis, you know, but not CIS, like SIS. And I think that there's this sort of sisterhood proclamation around it too, because I very much feel myself to be in a sisterhood with women and femmes and feminine people. And I think we're living into a kind of, you know, non-white, non-binary feminist future that is able to understand someone like me as part of sort of the core constituency of the feminist movement, and is able to understand that trans people, trans women, and trans femmes are part of this core group that needs to advocate for change and for better treatment of all people who are express themselves in a feminine way in this world.
Since you bring up sisterhood and you bring up this idea of family, I'm curious about, first off, I want, so that we put it in your own words, what genderqueer means for you, and also with that definition, do you feel like members of the LGBT community at large, LGBTQ community at large, understand that definition?
Well, you know, it's funny, Jorge, because I feel like the definition of genderqueer is something that I can define it, right? And I will. Like, it's like, you know, being genderqueer just means being between or outside of this idea that there are two genders, you know? But the thing is, I don't want to define it any more specifically than that, because there are so many terms that people in my community use. You know, there's genderqueer, there's non-binary, there's gender non-conforming as an identity, there's gender non-conforming as an adjective, there's trans kind of more generally, there's there's neutrois, there's agender, there's all these terms that people use. And I just love that like Tumblr has become this laboratory of genders where everyone's just like like inventing new words to describe with even more specificity and, might I say, poetry what their experience with gender has been. But I don't want people to fixate too much on the definitions of these words, because the technical definition, there is a certain point at which identities become poetry, and that's beautiful, right? That. A world in which our gender identity is understood poetically rather than logistically is a world in which we have less misogyny, is a world in which everyone has freedom to express themselves how they want, is a world in which patriarchy hopefully has no place. And so for me, it's like I don't fixate on any one term anymore. And I think sometimes that can be frustrating for people because like, no, I need a box to put you in. And I'm like, girl, the point is the boxes are boring and we don't need to like have them, right? And I also don't want people to feel like, I just don't want people to feel like it's a damn exam. You know what I mean? I'm like, being able to rigorously define the difference between genderqueer and gender nonconforming as if anybody in the gender nonconforming / genderqueer community / non-binary community can do that accurately ourselves. Like that's not the point. You know, that's missing the forest for the trees. Yeah. So I'm like, don't worry so much about the definition. It's much more about the principle and the experience. And the principle is that everyone deserves the right to gender self-determination. Everyone deserves the right to live in their gender exactly as it feels good, free from shame, you know, with dignity, with the respect of everyone in their community, and without any fear of violence or discrimination or harassment. And so it's like, you know, knowing exactly what the word means, like, isn't that important to me if you understand how to respect and honor the experience?